The Australian people nailed it when they named this horrible child predator Mr. Cruel. He's been haunting and taunting the Aussies for more than 40 years. But now there may be new leads that could breathe new life into this cold case. So let's jump into this Profiling Evil special edition, Mr. Cruel's Rabbit Hole. Hey, everybody, welcome to this special edition on Profiling Evil. Mr. Cruel terrorized his victims by first tying up his intended child victim's parents, only to sexually assault the child in an adjacent room where the parents were left to their imaginations of what was happening to their most prized possession. Before long, this predator evolved and he started removing his victims from their homes so that he could spend more time with them. The amount of time he spent with each victim got longer and longer with each subsequent victim, and soon it culminated in murder. Well, last week, 60 Minutes Australia released a project that I've been working on with former Australian investigators, forensic psychologists, and seasoned journalists. Our mission was simple: to just look into the case of Mr. Cruel, a predator who terrorized the Australian people and remains today one of the most feared people in the country. You know, I love to use maps to visualize key locations in criminal cases, stating that each location is simply a dot on the map. Well, let's watch this segment from the documentary Hunting Mr. Cruel. Everything is a dot on the map. It might be the location that a suspect lives, or the location where the victim lives, or the disposal site, or a piece of evidence, but everything is a point on the map.
With 40 years' experience as a senior law enforcement investigator, Mike King is also an expert in the technology we're using tonight. It's called GIS, a Geographic Information System.
And the power of true GIS is that we look at those points on the map and we don't just say there was a dot here and a dot there, but we say, what is the relationship, the significance between each of those? Because that's what really starts to bring questions to the surface. All of the stops.
Mike previously used GIS technology in the case of American serial killer Robert Benjamin Rhodes, known as the truck stop killer.
These colored points on the map are representative of times when he stopped for a layover.
Using data about his crimes, Mike King linked Rhodes to nearly 50 other murders, identifying missing persons and locations that also brought forward new witnesses.
Mr. Cruel attacked at least 4 girls in northern and eastern suburbs of Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, in the 1980s and 1990s. Investigators believe this predator committed a number of minor offenses for many years before, but his fantasies got the best of him and he started acting them out. Makes good sense. In many of these kinds of crimes, they begin with voyeurism, window peeking. As the predator watches the victim from a concealed location, the predator fantasizes about this relationship they think they're having. Before long, it usually happens this way: fantasy isn't enough, and the offender acts out, breaking into the home and committing an assault. Cruel's modus operandi was to break into the homes armed with a knife and a handgun. He always concealed his identity by wearing a covering on his face, kind of like a ski mask. In the early stages of his serial crimes, Cruel selected homes where the parents were inside. It appears that he, on the early stages of his crimes, found a level of excitement in confronting parents at gunpoint. There, he'd gain their compliance, tying them up. And then, to further terrorize the adults, he'd assault their child in the adjacent room, sometimes spending hours in the residence before leaving. Can you imagine how terrifying this was as a parent? And of course, I'm not minimizing how terrorizing for the victim. Well, I was invited by 60 Minutes Australia to talk about the criminal behaviors of Mr. Cruel and to provide insight into his crime motivation, victim selection process, and the geographic characteristics that are peculiar with this case. The result was a possible new suspect emerging during our investigation. I hope you'll follow the link in the description down below to watch the entire episode. But for now, I want to play a portion of this News 9 production for 60 Minutes Australia. They've given me permission to share this.
Using a world-first software system developed by global giant Esri, we'll analyse everything that's known about Mr. Cruel and his crimes.
The challenge becomes, how do I sift through this massive amount of information and interrogate it in a way that I can more quickly get to the nuggets that might help me in the investigation?
With the help of US criminal profiler Mike King, we'll feed in every shred of evidence, every witness statement. Geographical locations, weather, sounds, aerial imagery, a host of seemingly unrelated facts searching for new connections in the evidence.
The first recorded crime by Mr. Cruel was in 1987 when he targeted an 11-year-old girl in the Lower Plenty area of Melbourne. It happened at 4 o'clock in the morning when Cruel removed a pane of glass from the bedroom before waking the child's parents at knife and gunpoint. Once he had them bound and gagged and laying on the floor, he wrapped surgical tape around their eyes, blindfolding them. He then went in and gained control of his victim and her brother. He bound the little 6-year-old boy before he sexually assaulted the young girl for more than 2 hours. This predator took 2 trophies, a vinyl record and an old blue coat. A few months later, Cruel broke into another home, this time in East Ringwood, Melbourne. It was 5:45 a.m. when he assaulted the child's parents in this blitz-style attack at gunpoint, demanding again compliance and silence. The parents readily complied, hoping that this predator would just take some money and leave. Well, he did something a little different this time. He bound the couple using copper wire. This was a different binding than he used in the first assault, and it suggests that he was already evolving as a predator and may have realized the earlier bindings were insufficient. Well, once the couple was secured, Mr. Cruel went into the bedroom where the victim and 2 siblings were sleeping. He woke the victim and called her by name. Now imagine how unnerving that was. He pulled her from the bed and blindfolded her and gagged her by stuffing a small ball into her mouth and taping it shut. He took a few items of her clothes with him, which could have been functional or they may have been a trophy. And then he assaulted the child over an 18-hour period of time before dumping the child near a high school about 4 miles from the location that she was abducted from. This case showed more proof of Mr. Cruel's evolution as a criminal. After assaulting the child, who never saw her abductor, she was dumped off on a street corner, wearing only a shirt. Now, this is what's really strange. Her body was completely wrapped in green garbage bags. Well, this created a flurry of questions surrounding Cruel's background. Could he know something about DNA and the transfers? Cruel's next target was a 13-year-old, and she was from Canterbury, Melbourne. This victim, along with another victim, were both students at a local school. The child and her older sister were awakened by Mr. Cruel around midnight. Their parents were not at home this time. That was something different. Now, 2 important things were learned from a behavioral perspective. First, Cruel may have been evolving even further when he realized that the thrill he was getting by binding the parents at the crime scenes also presented a much higher level of risk. Thus, he may have chosen a home where the parents simply weren't home. Or his planning was flawed and he miscalculated their location. Now, the other interesting thing is that it showed Mr. Cruel's preferential victims, young, prepubescent children rather than older siblings. Now, Cruel continues to wear a ski mask and he uses a knife in the assaults. In this case, though, he did something unexpected and he took the family's car and drove the victim around for a while in the car before he dumped it near their home. It appears it was all theatrics to confuse the child about where the actual sexual assault would take place. You see, the child was transferred to another car, presumably Cruel's, and taken to a home where she was held and assaulted for 2.5 days. Cruel was spending more and more time with each victim. And, with that time he was spending, he was increasing his risk of being identified exponentially. Cruel, in my opinion, was becoming disorganized. He, in this case, disposed of the child near an electrical substation about 3 miles from her home. Now, she was fully clothed and wrapped in a blanket, and she remained blindfolded through the entire 50-hour ordeal. Let's watch this segment from Hunting Mr. Cruel on 60 Minutes Australia, where we recap some of the geographic locations in the first 3 cases that we've discussed.
King, this is information obviously still feeding into the map. We've now got 3 cases. We can see the locations of where they all are, but what are you looking for now?
Well, I think we continue to look at the location and the fact that it's all within about a 20-minute drive time from each other. And in that area, the offender has to feel comfortable to be able to function. And, when we look at serial predators, we have to look at them much like we would look at an animal. A lion, for instance, is going to hunt in an area as long as that lion can continue to find prey. From a geographic perspective, we just have to keep thinking, why is he comfortable in this area? Why is he selecting the victims where he is? And why is he disposing of them where he is?
The final victim believed to be tied to Mr. Cruel was a child named Carmen Chan. She was from Templeton, Melbourne. Carmen was babysitting her 2 younger sisters when the break-in occurred. The knife-wielding Mr. Cruel locked the younger children in a closet and then drugged Carmen out of the house by her hair. Can you see how aggressive and impatient he's becoming? This is a clear sign of his disorganization. Well, it would take about 10 minutes for the younger children to escape from the closet and call their parents at a nearby restaurant, telling them that Carmen had been kidnapped. Carmen's body was discovered almost a year later. The autopsy revealed that she'd been shot in the head 3 times. This causes me to theorize that she may have seen the face of her attacker, which led to her execution. Well, I hope this has given you enough information about the case of Mr. Cruel that you're going to go down the rabbit hole and check out the link below and watch the entire episode and spend some time learning about this most perplexing whodunit. You can also catch my podcast on the case of Mr. Cruel by visiting Mapping Evil with Mike King. It's on your favorite podcast platform. This has been a special episode of Profiling Evil. And once you've had time to take a look at the case of Mr. Cruel, I hope you'll take a moment and tell me your thoughts. Remember that you can find Profiling Evil on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you like podcasts, check us out on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget, check us out on the World Wide Web at profilingevil.com. Now listen, folks, please hit that like and subscribe button, and don't forget to consider joining our channel memberships. My favorite is the Academy level, where you get information not found anywhere else. Hey, we really do appreciate your support, so thanks again, and we'll see you all soon at the next crime scene.